The desert sun hammered down on Forward Operating Base Crimson like the fist of an angry god. Staff Sergeant Caleb Rivers adjusted his tactical vest and squinted through the heat shimmer rising from the armored vehicles lined up in the motor pool. 18 years of military service had carved him into something harder than the titanium plates protecting his chest. He was a man who understood that weakness was a luxury he couldn't afford. At 38, Caleb commanded respect through quiet authority rather than volume. His weathered face bore the map of a dozen deployments, each line earned through blood, sweat, and the kind of decisions that separated soldiers from civilians. The men under his command knew him as fair but unforgiving, a leader who'd crawl through fire for his squad but would cut out anyone who betrayed that trust without a second thought. His phone buzzed against his hip, a rare communication from home. Lisa's messages had become increasingly sparse over the past 3 months. Their conversations had been reduced to logistics about bills and brief updates about their children, Connor and Emma. Caleb understood deployment strain. He'd seen stronger marriages crumble under the weight of separation. But Lisa had seemed different when he'd left for this tour. Distant, almost relieved. "Rivers, you copy?" Sergeant Bailey's voice crackled through his radio. "Go ahead." "Intel briefing in 20. They want squad leaders." Caleb clipped the radio back to his vest. 20 years he'd been married to Lisa Brennan. He'd met her at a bar near Fort Bragg when she was a nursing student, and he was a young enlisted man with more ambition than sense. She'd been drawn to his intensity, the way he approached everything with calculated precision. Their early years had been good, with Lisa supporting his career while building her own at the county hospital. Their children had arrived when his rank could support a growing family. But something had shifted after his promotion to staff sergeant 2 years ago. The responsibility meant longer deployments, more time away from home. Lisa had grown resentful, making comments about him loving the army more than his family. Caleb knew it wasn't true. Everything he did was for them. Every mission completed, every promotion earned, every risk taken was to secure their future. The briefing room was a converted shipping container, the air conditioning working overtime against the Afghan heat. Major Thompson spread satellite photos across the metal table, pointing to compounds marked with red circles. These were standard sweep and clear operations, the kind Caleb could execute in his sleep. "Timeline is 48 hours, Thompson said. "Intelligence suggests weapons cache in the northern compound. Rivers, your squad takes point." Caleb studied the aerial shots, his mind automatically calculating approach angles and potential threats. This was his element, controlled chaos, where his decisions meant life or death. Here, loyalty was absolute, and betrayal meant immediate consequences. Here, he was in control. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Lisa. He'd read it after the briefing. 2 hours later, gear prepped and squad briefed, Caleb finally checked his messages. The first was routine. Emma had made the honor roll. Connor's baseball team had won their tournament. These were standard updates he'd grown to expect, but the second message made his blood freeze. "Don't expect us when you get back. The kids and I are happy with my new husband. The kids chose his surname over yours." Caleb read the message 3 times. His breathing remained controlled despite the sledgehammer blow to his chest. 20 years of marriage. 2 children he'd sacrificed everything for. 18 years of military service, missing birthdays, holidays, soccer games, all to provide for a family that had apparently replaced him. His fingers moved across the screen with the same precision he used to field strip his rifle. Understood. One word, clean, final. No emotion, no questions, no begging, just acknowledgement of a situation report. He powered down the phone and slipped it into his gear. Tomorrow's mission required his full attention, and Caleb Rivers never allowed personal complications to compromise his professional responsibilities. That was what separated him from other men, the ability to compartmentalize, to function under pressure, to make hard decisions without hesitation. But as he lay on his narrow cot that night, staring at the metal ceiling of his quarters, Caleb's mind began working with the same methodical precision he applied to military operations. Lisa had made her choice. His children he'd provided for, protected, sacrificed for, had chosen another man's name over his. They didn't know what they'd just unleashed. Caleb Rivers was a man who'd spent 18 years learning how to neutralize threats, eliminate obstacles, and complete missions regardless of the cost. He'd been forged in environments where betrayal meant death, and loyalty was the only currency that mattered. His family had just declared war on him. They simply didn't know it yet. 3 days later, Caleb emerged from the northern compound with his squad intact and the mission accomplished. The weapons cache had been larger than intelligence suggested, enough ordnance to supply a small army. His team had performed flawlessly, each man trusting Caleb's leadership even when the operation went sideways and they had faced unexpected resistance. Back at base, Caleb methodically cleaned his weapons and updated his after-action report. Precision in all things. It was how he'd survived this long. The message from Lisa sat like an unexploded device in his pocket, but he hadn't allowed it to compromise his focus. Professional before personal. Always. But now, with the mission complete and administrative duties handled, he had time to process what his wife had revealed. New husband. The phrase suggested more than a simple affair. It implied a level of planning and commitment that spoke to long-term betrayal. His children choosing another man's surname wasn't an impulsive decision made by confused kids. It was the result of systematic manipulation by adults who'd convinced them their father was replaceable. Caleb's phone showed 17 missed calls from his sister Rebecca, 3 from his lawyer Mike Flanagan, and multiple voicemails. He listened to Rebecca's first message. "Caleb, I don't know what's happening, but Lisa showed up at Mom's house with some man named Troy Hamilton, introducing him as her husband. She had papers. Said you'd agreed to sign over parental rights. Mom nearly had a heart attack. Call me." Troy Hamilton. Now he had a name. The subsequent messages painted a clearer picture. Lisa had apparently been telling people that Caleb had abandoned his family, that he'd agreed to the divorce and custody arrangement via email. She'd produced documentation suggesting he'd willingly transferred all parental rights to her new husband, a man the children now called Dad. Mike Flanagan's message was more professional, but equally disturbing. "Caleb, Lisa's attorney contacted my office with what they claim is a signed agreement giving her full custody and property rights. I've never seen this document before and the signature doesn't look right. We need to talk immediately." Caleb closed his eyes and ran through the timeline. 6 months into deployment, minimal communication from home, and now a coordinated campaign to erase him from his children's lives. This wasn't spontaneous infidelity. It was a calculated operation designed to steal everything he'd worked for. His phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. He answered without speaking. "Caleb." Lisa's voice was sharp, panicked. "Caleb, what did you do?" "I responded to your message. You don't understand what you've done. My lawyer says you've started some kind of legal action. You have no right to." "I have every right," Caleb interrupted, his voice flat and controlled. "I'm still legally married to you, still the father of those children, still the owner of half our assets. Your new husband can't change that with fake documents." Lisa's breathing was ragged. "It's not like that. Troy and I..." Staff Sergeant Rivers. Caleb's tone could have frozen the Afghan desert. "You will address me by my rank since you clearly don't remember what it means to be my wife." Silence stretched between them. When Lisa spoke again, her voice had lost its confident edge. "Caleb, please, the kids are happy, they're settled. Troy loves them like his own." "Troy Hamilton," Caleb said, testing the name. "Investment broker from Dallas. Divorced twice, behind on child support for his own kids, lost his Series 7 license 3 years ago for irregular trading practices. Currently under investigation by the Texas Department of Banking for unlicensed financial advising." Another silence, longer this time. "How did you..." "You thought I wouldn't investigate the man living in my house with my children?" Caleb's voice remained perfectly controlled. "You thought I wouldn't want to know who's sleeping in my bed and calling himself their father?" "Caleb, listen." "I'm done listening, Lisa. You made your choice. You involved my children in your betrayal. You tried to steal my name from them and give it to another man. He paused, letting the words settle. Now you get to live with the consequences. What does that mean? What are you going to do? I'm going to come home, Caleb said simply, and then we're going to have a conversation about what happens to people who try to destroy me. He ended the call and immediately dialed Mike Flanagan. Mike, it's Caleb. I need you to file for emergency custody and freeze all joint assets. Also, I want a complete background investigation on Troy Hamilton. Financial records, criminal history, employment verification, everything. Caleb, slow down. What's happened since we last talked? My wife tried to steal my children and erase me from their lives. Now, I'm going to show her why that was a mistake. As Caleb outlined his initial requirements to his lawyer, his mind was already 3 steps ahead, planning moves and counter-moves like the military campaign this had become. Lisa and Troy had made a critical error. They'd assumed he would react emotionally, that he'd be broken by their betrayal. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous. A professional soldier with nothing left to lose and 18 years of training in how to protect what mattered most. The war for his family was about to begin. The C-30 transport touched down at Fort Hood on a gray October morning. Its cargo of soldiers was eager to reunite with families and begin their earned leave. Caleb Rivers descended the aircraft steps with his gear bag slung over one shoulder, moving with the unhurried precision that marked him as a career military man. Around him, his fellow soldiers were met by wives, children, and parents. Emotional reunions filled with tears and laughter. Caleb was met by Sergeant Miguel Santos, his closest friend in the unit and the only person he'd trusted with the full details of his situation. "How we doing this, brother?" Santos asked as they walked toward the parking area. "Clean and professional," Caleb replied. "By the book, until it's time not to be." Santos had been at Caleb's wedding, had been Connor's godfather, and had spent enough evenings at the Rivers house to understand the family dynamics. He'd also served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan alongside Caleb, and had seen what the man could do when pushed past his breaking point. "You sure about this path?" Santos asked as they reached his pickup truck. "Once you start down this road." "They started down this road when they decided to betray me," Caleb interrupted. "I'm just going to finish it." The drive to Caleb's lawyer's office took 30 minutes through the familiar streets of Killeen. Everything looked the same, but Caleb felt like he was seeing his hometown through different eyes, the eyes of a man betrayed by those he'd trusted most. Mike Flanagan's office was in a converted Victorian house near the courthouse, a deliberate choice that projected both respectability and accessibility. Flanagan had been handling military divorces and family law for 15 years. He understood the unique challenges faced by deployed soldiers and their families. "Caleb," Flanagan said, rising from behind his desk as they entered. "Good to have you back, though I wish it was under better circumstances. What's our situation?" Flanagan opened a thick file. Lisa's attorney filed for divorce 3 days ago, claiming irreconcilable differences and requesting full custody based on your extended absences and inability to maintain a stable home environment. They're also claiming you verbally agreed to the arrangement and that you've been financially negligent. "And the documentation?" "Forged, poorly," Flanagan confirmed. "The signature analysis shows what we suspected. Someone tried to replicate your signature using samples from old documents, but the pressure patterns and stroke sequences are all wrong." He pulled out a magnifying glass and several documents. More importantly, they made a critical error. He pointed to a signature line on what appeared to be a custody agreement. "This document is allegedly from 2 weeks ago, but it's signed Caleb Rivers, Staff Sergeant. You weren't promoted to Staff Sergeant until 18 months ago. The forger used an old document as reference." Caleb studied the paperwork with the same attention he'd used to examine enemy intelligence. "What about Hamilton?" "That's where it gets interesting." Flanagan pulled out another file. "Troy Hamilton isn't just a failed investment broker. He's currently under federal investigation for running an unlicensed investment scheme that defrauded military families out of retirement savings. The FBI has been building a case for 8 months. "How does that help us?" because one of his victims was Sergeant First Class David Kim from your own unit. Kim lost $40,000, his entire deployment savings, to Hamilton's fake investment fund. The FBI has been looking for additional victims and witnesses. Caleb felt the first stirring of something that wasn't quite satisfaction, but was close. So, Hamilton specializes in targeting military families. Gets worse, or better, depending on your perspective. Lisa isn't just his girlfriend. She's been helping him identify targets. Her position at the county hospital gives her access to military medical records. She's been feeding him information about which soldiers are deployed, how much money they're making, and when they're coming home. The pieces clicked into place in Caleb's mind. Lisa's questions about his deployment pay, her sudden interest in his fellow soldiers' families, her insistence that he set up direct deposit for his combat pay. She hadn't just betrayed him as a husband. She'd been systematically betraying every military family she could access. How many victims? FBI estimates 27 families. Total loss is around $800,000. Hamilton and Lisa have been running this operation for almost 2 years. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, processing the information. When he spoke, his voice was deadly calm. "Where are my children now?" "Still at the house. Your house," Flanagan replied. "Lisa moved Hamilton in 3 weeks after you deployed. Neighbors report that Connor and Emma seem withdrawn, spending most of their time in their rooms. Mrs. Patterson next door says she's heard yelling in the evenings." "What kind of yelling?" "Arguments between Lisa and Hamilton about money," and Flanagan hesitated. "There's been at least one incident where she called the police about a domestic disturbance, but no charges were filed." Caleb's hands remained steady on the arms of his chair, but Santos could see the subtle tension in his jaw. In 18 years of friendship, he'd seen that look exactly twice. Both times before, Caleb had done things that made their enemies disappear permanently. "What are our legal options?" Caleb asked. "With the forged documents and the federal investigation, we can destroy their custody claim and probably have Lisa charged with fraud. But there's something else." Flanagan leaned forward. "Hamilton has been using your house as collateral for loans. He's already taken out 2 mortgages against the property using forged documentation. If this continues, you could lose everything." Timeline. FBI raids are scheduled for next week. They're going to arrest Hamilton and several associates, including Lisa, but there's a window where he might try to liquidate assets and run. Caleb stood up, his decision made. "I want to see my children before any of that happens." "Caleb," Flanagan said carefully, "given the federal investigation and the pending charges, it might be better to let the system handle this. If you do something that compromises the FBI case." "The FBI can have what's left when I'm done," Caleb said. "But first I'm going home to collect my family." As they left the lawyer's office, Santos caught Caleb's arm. "What's the plan, brother?" Caleb looked at his friend with eyes that had gone completely cold. "Troy Hamilton made 2 mistakes. First, he stole from soldiers. Second, he involved my children in his operation." He paused, watching traffic move past on the street where he'd grown up. "I'm going to make sure he understands why both of those were fatal errors." The soldier was home, and the war was about to begin. Caleb spent his first night back in Texas at a motel 6 miles from his house, using the time to conduct what he called operational preparation. Years of military intelligence work had taught him that successful missions required thorough reconnaissance and careful planning. Personal emotional investment could not be allowed to compromise tactical effectiveness. At 0500 hours, he was parked 3 blocks from his home in Santos's pickup truck, observing traffic patterns and neighbor routines through military-grade binoculars. His house, a modest 2-story colonial he bought when Connor was born, looked different with Troy Hamilton's black BMW sedan in the driveway where Caleb's own truck should have been. Through the kitchen window, he could see Lisa moving around, preparing breakfast. She looked tired, older than her 36 years, wearing a robe Caleb didn't recognize. At 0730, she called upstairs and Connor appeared first. His 12-year-old son had grown taller in 6 months, his shoulders broader. Emma followed, 8 years old, and carrying the backpack Caleb had bought her before deployment. Watching his children eat breakfast at the table where he'd read them bedtime stories and helped with homework created a hollow ache in his chest, but Caleb forced himself to observe with clinical detachment. Connor picked at his food, staring out the window. Emma seemed to be talking to herself, a habit she developed when anxious. Neither child showed the happiness Lisa had claimed in her message. At 07:45, Troy Hamilton appeared. Caleb studied the man who'd moved into his home and convinced his children to take his name. Hamilton was younger than expected, probably early 30s, well-dressed in the calculated casual style of someone trying to project success. Average height, soft around the middle, the kind of man who'd never faced real physical threat in his life. Hamilton ruffled Connor's hair with familiar ease, kissed Lisa on the cheek, and sat down at the head of Caleb's table in Caleb's chair. The casual assumption of ownership was like watching an enemy soldier plant a flag on American soil. Caleb photographed license plates, noted arrival and departure times, and tracked movement patterns. By noon, he had a complete operational picture. Hamilton left the house at 08:30, returning around 1700. Lisa worked 3 12-hour shifts per week at the hospital. The children walked to school, were met by Lisa in the afternoons, and spent most of their time indoors. More importantly, Caleb identified vulnerabilities. Hamilton met with potential investment clients at the house, a violation of both the federal investigation surveillance requirements and basic operational security. Lisa left financial documents visible on the kitchen counter. Neither of them seemed aware they were being watched. That afternoon, Caleb drove to Emma's elementary school and Connor's middle school, timing his arrival to coincide with dismissal. He parked across the street from Emma's school and waited, knowing she always exited through the main doors and turned left toward home. She appeared at 15:15, walking alone with her backpack dragging behind her. Caleb rolled down his window. Emma looked up, confusion flickering across her face before recognition hit. For a moment, her expression was pure joy, the same look she'd given him one Christmas morning when she was 6 and found the bicycle he'd assembled in secret. "Daddy!" she cried, running toward the truck, backpack forgotten on the sidewalk. Caleb stepped out and caught her in a fierce hug, feeling her small arms wrap around his neck with desperate strength. This was why he fought, why he'd spent 18 years in uniform, why he'd endured months of separation and hardship. This moment, this child, this family. "I missed you, baby girl."
"I missed you too. Mommy said you weren't coming back. She said you didn't want us anymore."
Emma's voice was small, confused.
"But I knew she was wrong. I knew you'd come back."
Caleb knelt to Emma's eye level, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I want you more than anything in the world. Don't ever forget that, no matter what anyone tells you. Troy says we have to call him Dad now. He says it's the law." Emma's face scrunched with 8-year-old logic, trying to make sense of adult betrayal. "But you're my dad. Can I have 2 dads?" "Listen to me very carefully," Caleb said. "I am your father. I will always be your father. Nobody can change that, no matter what papers they sign or what names they make you use. Do you understand?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I need you to be very brave for me. Can you do that?" Another nod. "I'm going to fix everything, but it's going to take a little time. Until then, I need you to remember that I love you and your brother more than anything, and I'm working very hard to bring you home." "Are you going to take us away from Troy?" Caleb looked into his daughter's eyes the same green as his own, and made a promise. "Yes, Troy is not going to be part of our family much longer." After returning Emma to the sidewalk and watching her walk safely toward home, Caleb drove to Connor's school. His son was harder to approach. 12-year-old boys traveled in packs and were more aware of adult attention, but Caleb had been tracking Connor's schedule and knew he stayed after school on Tuesdays for chess club. Connor emerged at 16:30, walking alone toward the bike racks. He'd always been more serious than Emma, more observant, more likely to understand the complexity of what was happening to their family. "Connor." His son turned, and Caleb saw a flash of the same joy Emma had shown, quickly replaced by confusion and something that looked like anger. "Mom said you didn't want us anymore." Your mother was wrong. Connor studied his father with 12-year-old skepticism. Then why didn't you come home before now? Why didn't you call? Because I was gathering intelligence on the people who tried to steal my family. Caleb used deliberately military language, knowing Connor understood and respected the concepts. I don't make moves until I understand the battlefield. Troy is not that bad, Connor said, but his voice lacked conviction. He bought me a new baseball glove. Did he ask you to call him Dad? Connor's jaw tightened, a gesture he'd inherited from Caleb. Yeah, said it would make things easier for everyone. Said you'd signed papers saying it was okay. I never signed anything giving up my rights as your father. Those papers were fake. I knew it. Connor's composure cracked slightly. I told Mom something was wrong. You'd never just give up on us. No, Caleb said, I wouldn't, and I haven't. Father and son looked at each other across the school parking lot. Two males of the same bloodline, understanding each other without the need for excessive words. What happens now? Connor asked. Now I deal with the people who thought they could destroy our family, Caleb replied. It won't be pretty and it won't be quiet, but when it's over, you and Emma will be safe, and the people who hurt us will understand why that was a mistake. Connor nodded slowly. At 12, he was old enough to understand that sometimes justice required more than legal proceeding. Dad. Connor's voice was quiet. I never wanted to change my name. I'm still a Rivers. Yes, Caleb said. You are. As he drove back to the motel that evening, Caleb's phone rang. Lisa's number. Stop following my children, she said without preamble. Our children, Caleb corrected. And I wasn't following them. I was talking to them. You can't just... I can do whatever I want regarding my children until a court tells me otherwise. And since your custody documents are forgeries, that conversation is going to go very differently than you planned. Silence. Lisa, Caleb said, his voice taking on the tone that had made enemy combatants surrender without firing a shot. You have 72 hours to remove Troy Hamilton from my house and file for divorce with legitimate terms. After that, I stop being reasonable. What does that mean? It means you really don't want to find out what I learned to do during 18 years of military service. He ended the call and began planning the next phase of his operation. The reconnaissance was complete. His children knew he was back and fighting for them. Lisa and Hamilton were aware they were being hunted, but didn't yet understand the scope of the threat they faced. Tomorrow, the real war would begin. Caleb began the next morning at 0600 hours with a visit to Sergeant First Class David Kim, the soldier who'd lost $40,000 to Troy Hamilton's investment scheme. Kim lived in military housing near Fort Hood, a modest apartment that should have been supplemented by the deployment savings Hamilton had stolen. Staff Sergeant Rivers. Kim answered his door with military bearing despite being in civilian clothes. Heard you were back stateside. I need to talk to you about Troy Hamilton. Kim's expression darkened. That guy. The FBI says they're close to making arrests, but my money's still gone. My wife had to go back to work full time. Kids are in daycare instead of with family. All because I trusted some smooth-talking man who said he could triple my combat pay investments. Caleb sat in Kim's sparse living room, noting the absence of the furniture and electronics a sergeant first class should be able to afford. Tell me exactly how he approached you. Your wife, actually, Lisa. She was treating my youngest for pneumonia at the county hospital. Started asking about deployment schedules and family finances. Said she knew someone who specialized in helping military families build wealth while deployed. Made it sound like she was doing us a favor. The systematic nature of the betrayal continued to unfold. Lisa hadn't just cheated on Caleb, she'd used her position of trust as a medical professional to target vulnerable military families. How many families from our unit did he target? 7 that I know of. Johnson lost 60 grand, Martinez lost 35, Sergeant Williams got hit for 22,000, all guys with kids, all trying to build something for their families. Kim's hands clenched into fists. We served our country, trusted our fellow military families, and got robbed by some civilian and your cheating wife.
Caleb understood Kim's anger, respected it, and planned to use it. Want to help me get your money back?
Hell yes. What do you need?
Hamilton's still operating. FBI's being careful building their case, but he's liquidating assets and preparing to run. I need to accelerate his timeline, force him to make mistakes.
Kim leaned forward. What kind of mistakes?
The kind that happen when someone thinks they're smarter than they actually are.
Caleb pulled out his phone and showed Kim surveillance photos of Hamilton's BMW. He meets potential clients at my house every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Today's Thursday. You want me to show up as a potential client?
I want you to show up as a very angry former client, with backup.
Kim smiled, the predatory expression of a soldier who'd finally been given permission to engage the enemy. When and where? At 1500 hours, Kim and 3 other victims from their unit, Johnson, Martinez, and Williams, parked across the street from Caleb's house. Hamilton's BMW was in the driveway along with a Ford sedan Caleb didn't recognize. Through the living room window, Hamilton could be seen giving a presentation to a middle-aged couple, probably retirees looking to invest pension funds. Caleb, observing from 2 blocks away through binoculars, called Kim's cell phone. Go. Kim and the others walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Through the window, Caleb watched Hamilton excuse himself from his clients and answer the door. The conversation started calmly. Kim began by introducing himself as a former client with questions. Hamilton's body language shifted from confident to defensive as he recognized the threat. The other 3 soldiers moved into position around Hamilton, not threatening but unmistakably present. Military bearing was impossible to mistake, and Hamilton understood he was facing men who'd been trained to handle tense situations with professional prowess. Hamilton stepped outside, closing the door behind him to prevent his current clients from overhearing. That's when the conversation became more animated. Kim pointed at Hamilton's chest, his voice carrying across the yard. The other soldiers closed ranks, making it clear that Hamilton was surrounded. Caleb watched Hamilton's face cycle through confusion, fear, and desperation. The man was used to targeting isolated military families, not confronting multiple trained soldiers simultaneously. When Johnson, a former Army Ranger with scars from IED shrapnel, took a step closer, Hamilton actually stumbled backward. The confrontation lasted exactly 8 minutes, long enough for Hamilton to understand that his victims had found him, organized against him, and weren't going to disappear quietly. Short enough to avoid law enforcement intervention or any charges that could compromise the FBI investigation. As the soldiers walked away, Caleb could see Hamilton through the window, frantically making phone calls. The elderly couple had left through the back door during the confrontation. Another client lost. Another sign that Hamilton's operation was falling apart. Caleb's phone rang 15 minutes later. Lisa, what did you do? Her voice was shaking. I introduced Troy to some of his former clients. Seemed like they had questions about their investment returns. Those men threatened him. He's talking about calling the police. Excellent idea, Caleb said. He should definitely call the police and explain how he defrauded military families out of their life savings. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic. Caleb, this has to stop. You're scaring the children. My children are at school. Your boyfriend is scared because he's finally facing consequences for his actions. There's a difference. He's not. Troy is a good man. He loves Connor and Emma. Troy Hamilton is a criminal who's been using you to identify military families to rob. The FBI has an 8-month investigation file on his activities. Your hospital access was his greatest asset for targeting deployed soldiers. The silence stretched long enough that Caleb wondered if the call had dropped. Lisa, you still there? That's not. He told me the investment business was legitimate. He said he was helping military families build wealth. Check your bank accounts, Caleb said. See how much money's been transferred out in the past 6 months. See if Troy's name is on any of your credit cards or loan applications. Then ask yourself why a successful investment advisor needed to move into a house owned by someone else. He ended the call and immediately dialed his lawyer. Mike, it's Caleb. I need you to file for emergency custody today. Lisa's becoming aware that Hamilton isn't who she thought he was, and he's going to pressure her to run or do something desperate.
What happened? Hamilton met some unhappy customers today. His confidence is shaken, and people who are scared make bad decisions. I want my children legally protected before he decides to disappear with Lisa and use them as leverage.
I'll have the papers filed within 2 hours. Also contact the FBI agent handling the Hamilton case. Tell them I have additional victims willing to testify and evidence that Hamilton's been using my house to conduct business. They might want to accelerate their timeline.
As Caleb drove back to the motel, he felt the satisfaction of a plan proceeding exactly as designed. Hamilton was rattled. Lisa was questioning everything she thought she knew, and the legal system was about to add official pressure to the unofficial pressure he'd been applying. Phase 2 was complete. Tomorrow he'd begin Phase 3, and Troy Hamilton would learn why targeting military families had been the last mistake of his civilian life. FBI Special Agent Rebecca Torres called Caleb at 0700 the next morning. Her voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to dealing with dangerous criminals and uncooperative witnesses.
Staff Sergeant Rivers, I understand you've been conducting your own investigation into Troy Hamilton.
I've been gathering information about the man living in my house with my children.
That information gathering needs to stop. We're 48 hours from arrests, and civilian interference could compromise 18 months of investigation.
Caleb had expected this call. Federal agents didn't appreciate competition, especially from military personnel who understood operational planning.
Agent Torres, with respect, my children's safety is my primary concern. Everything else is secondary.
Your children are safer if Hamilton doesn't know we're closing in. If he realizes how much trouble he's in, he might run and take your family with him.
He already knows he's in trouble. The question is whether he knows how much. Caleb paused, choosing his words carefully. Agent Torres, I've read Hamilton's profile. He's a narcissist who believes he's smarter than everyone around him. Men like that don't run when cornered. They double down and make increasingly desperate moves. Which is exactly why you need to back off and let us handle this professionally.
I am handling it professionally. I'm just using different rules of engagement than you are.
Agent Torres was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly. You served in Afghanistan, multiple tours. You understand operational security. 18 years active duty, I understand more than operational security. Then you understand that sometimes the best way to catch a predator is to let him think he's still hunting. Caleb recognized the olive branch. Torres was offering to share intelligence in exchange for his cooperation. What do you need from me? Hamilton's been liquidating assets for 3 weeks, moving money through offshore accounts, converting investments to cash, preparing for a disappearance. But he's made one critical error. He's still conducting business from your house because he believes the property makes him appear legitimate and successful. You want to use the house as a trap. We want to document him conducting business there. Video evidence of him using forged documents to represent himself as the property owner. But if he gets spooked and stops using the location, the FBI loses their best evidence, and he disappears with my wife and children. Exactly. Caleb considered the proposal. Federal law enforcement moved slowly but thoroughly. Military operations moved fast but required precise targeting. The combination might be exactly what was needed. What's your timeline? Monday morning. Simultaneous arrests of Hamilton, Lisa, and 4 associates. We're coordinating with the Texas Banking Commission and IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Complete financial seizure of all assets. What about my children? Child Protective Services will be standing by. Temporary custody will be awarded to appropriate family members pending resolution of criminal charges. Caleb felt ice form in his chest. CPS. My children aren't going into the system. Staff Sergeant Lisa is facing federal charges for fraud and conspiracy. Hamilton is facing multiple felonies. The children can't remain in that environment. The children go to my sister Rebecca. She's clean, stable, has no criminal history, and is already on my emergency contact forms.
Agent Torres was quiet for several seconds. "I'll see what I can arrange, but I need your word that you won't interfere with the operation." "You have it with one condition." "What condition?" "I want to be there when you arrest Hamilton. I want him to see my face when he realizes what he's lost." "That's not standard procedure. Agent Torres, I've spent 6 months being erased from my children's lives by a man who's been systematically stealing from military families. When he goes down, I want him to understand exactly who brought him down and why." Another pause. "I'll see what I can do." After ending the call, Caleb drove to Rebecca's house to brief his sister on the situation. Rebecca was 2 years older, a high school math teacher with the kind of steady competence that made her perfect for handling family crises. She'd been furious when Lisa showed up with Hamilton, claiming to be married, and had immediately suspected something was wrong. So Monday morning, FBI arrests them both, and Connor and Emma come here temporarily until I can get permanent custody restored. Rebecca studied her brother's face. "What aren't you telling me, Caleb? This isn't over when Hamilton gets arrested. He's destroyed my family, stolen my children's trust, convinced them I abandoned them. Legal justice isn't enough." "What does that mean?" Caleb looked out Rebecca's kitchen window toward the backyard where he'd played as a child, where Connor and Emma would hopefully play again soon. "It means Troy Hamilton hasn't finished paying for what he's done to my family." That afternoon, Caleb positioned himself across the street from his house to conduct what would be his final surveillance operation. Hamilton was meeting with potential clients again, a young couple with the kind of military bearing that suggested they might be junior enlisted personnel looking to invest their first deployment earnings. Through his binoculars, Caleb watched Hamilton work his presentation, spreading documents across the dining room table, pointing to charts and graphs that promised impossible returns. The same dining room where Caleb had helped Connor with homework and played board games with Emma. The young couple looked convinced. Hamilton was smooth, professional, using his temporary residence in Caleb's house to project success and stability. In 30 minutes, another military family would hand over their savings to a criminal who'd already stolen hundreds of thousands from their fellow service members. Caleb's phone rang. Mike Flanagan. "Emergency custody hearing is set for Monday at 0900. FBI coordinated with family court to schedule it immediately after the arrests. You'll have temporary custody by noon." "What about Lisa's rights?" "Hard to exercise parental rights from federal detention. Her attorney can file motions, but judges don't look favorably on parents who involve children in criminal enterprises. And the House, asset forfeiture laws are complicated, but since Hamilton used forged documents to claim ownership and take loans against the property, you should be able to recover it. Might take time, but it'll happen." Caleb watched the young couple shake Hamilton's hand and leave with investment paperwork, another victory for the man who'd stolen everything from him. But Monday morning, that would change. "Mike, after I get custody of my children, I want you to file a civil lawsuit against Hamilton for emotional distress, fraud, and alienation of affection. I want to take everything he has left after the FBI finishes with him." "Caleb, the man's going to federal prison. He won't have anything left to take." "Then I want him to understand that even in prison, I'm not done with him." As night fell over Colleen, Caleb sat in his motel room cleaning his service pistol. Not because he planned to use it, but because the routine helped him think. Monday morning would bring official justice. Hamilton would be arrested, charged, and eventually convicted. Lisa would face consequences for her betrayal. His children would come home, but justice and satisfaction were different things, and Caleb Rivers was a man who understood the difference between ending a threat and ensuring it never returned. Troy Hamilton had started a war when he decided to target military families. Monday morning, he'd learn how that war ended, but his education and consequences were far from over. Monday morning arrived with a kind of crystal clarity that seemed to promise decisive action. Caleb was awake at 04:30, running through his final preparations with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through multiple deployments.
Today, Troy Hamilton's operation would end, his children would come home, and the first phase of true justice would begin. At 0600, Agent Torres called with final coordination details. "We have surveillance teams in position around your house. Hamilton arrived 10 minutes ago with a briefcase. Probably final asset liquidation. We're moving at 0800. Where do you want me?" The command post is set up in the Walmart parking lot 6 blocks south. You can observe but not participate directly. Understood. Caleb arrived at the command post to find a mobile FBI unit coordinating with local law enforcement, Texas Banking Commission investigators, and IRS Criminal Investigation Division agents. The scale of the operation impressed him. Hamilton's scheme had apparently reached federal significance. Agent Torres met him at the perimeter. "Your children left for school at the normal time. Lisa's at the hospital starting her shift. We'll take Hamilton first, then coordinate arrests of associates." "What about Lisa?" "Hospital security will handle her arrest quietly. We don't want to create a scene in a medical facility." Through the command post monitors, Caleb watched FBI agents position themselves around his house. Hamilton was visible through the living room window, working at what used to be Caleb's desk, completely unaware that 18 months of investigation was about to collapse on him. At exactly 0800, agents moved simultaneously to all entrances. Caleb watched Hamilton's face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and terror as armed federal agents flooded into what he'd thought was his safe haven. The arrest was swift and professional. Hamilton offered no resistance. Men like him rarely did when faced with real consequences. Within 15 minutes, he was in federal custody. His briefcase and all financial documents were seized as evidence. Phase 1 complete. Agent Torres reported, "Hamilton's in custody. The house is secured. Evidence collection is in progress." Caleb felt grim satisfaction watching his wife's lover taken away in handcuffs. But the emotion was tempered by what still needed to happen. Justice had been served, but justice wasn't enough. At 0930, Caleb arrived at family court for the emergency custody hearing. Mike Flanagan met him in the courthouse lobby with documents and a strategic briefing. "Lisa's been arrested at the hospital. Her attorney is requesting a continuance, claiming she needs time to retain proper counsel. Will they grant it?" "Not likely. Judge Martinez has the full FBI file, including evidence that Lisa used her medical position to target military families. He's not sympathetic to delays." The hearing lasted 27 minutes. Judge Martinez reviewed forged custody documents, FBI evidence of Lisa's involvement in Hamilton's scheme, and testimony about the children's well-being. His ruling was decisive and comprehensive. Temporary full custody awarded to Staff Sergeant Caleb Rivers, effective immediately. Mrs. Rivers' visitation rights suspended pending resolution of federal criminal charges. Child Protective Services will conduct home visits to ensure stability, but the children will reside with their father. Caleb felt something inside his chest unlock for the first time in 6 months. His children were coming home. By 1100, he was at Rebecca's house watching Connor and Emma process the news that their father had returned to take them home, that their mother was in jail, and that Troy Hamilton was gone from their lives permanently. Emma's reaction was pure 8-year-old relief. "I knew you'd come back, Daddy. I knew you'd fix everything." Connor was more complicated, as 12-year-old boys often were. "What happens to Mom?" "Your mother made some very bad choices," Caleb said carefully. "She's going to have to answer for those choices. But you and Emma are safe, and you're coming home with me." "Is she going to prison?" Caleb looked at his son, really looked at him. Connor had his mother's eyes, but his father's jawline, and something in his expression suggested he understood more about Lisa's betrayal than an 8-year-old would. "Probably, for a while." Connor nodded slowly. "Good. She lied to us about you. She made us think you didn't want us anymore. I will always want you. Both of you. No matter what happens, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise, remember that I will never abandon you." That afternoon, Caleb moved his children back into their house, now cleared of Hamilton's presence and FBI evidence collection. Someone had cleaned up, removed Hamilton's belongings, and restored the house to something resembling its former condition. Emma ran to her room to check that her stuffed animals were still arranged properly. Connor went to his room and closed the door, needing time to process everything that had changed. Caleb stood in his living room surrounded by furniture and memories, understanding that winning his children back was just the beginning of rebuilding their family. His phone rang. Agent Torres. Hamilton's talking, trying to negotiate a reduced sentence by providing information about other associates and operations. He's claiming Lisa was a reluctant participant who didn't understand the scope of his activities. Is that true? Bank records suggest otherwise. Lisa's been receiving payments from Hamilton's operation for 14 months. She wasn't a victim. She was a partner. Caleb felt the cold clarity that had carried him through combat operations. What's his probable sentence? 8 to 12 years federal time. Financial fraud, conspiracy, targeting military families. Judges don't look favorably on any of that. And Lisa? 3 to 5 years, probably. First offense, cooperation with investigation, mother of minor children. She'll get consideration, Hamilton won't. After ending the call, Caleb sat in his living room and considered the situation. Legal justice was proceeding exactly as it should. Hamilton would spend most of the next decade in federal prison. Lisa would lose several years of her life and her nursing license. Both would face financial ruin from civil lawsuits and asset forfeiture. But something still felt incomplete. That evening, after Connor and Emma were asleep in their own beds for the first time in 6 months, Caleb received a call from an unexpected source, Troy Hamilton's attorney. Staff Sergeant Rivers, my client would like to speak with you. About what? He wants to apologize and discuss making amends for what he's done to your family. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Where is he? Federal Detention Center downtown. He's authorized for visits. I'll be there tomorrow. As Caleb hung up, he smiled for the first time since returning from deployment. Troy Hamilton wanted to apologize and make amends. How thoughtful of him. Tomorrow, Caleb would explain to Hamilton exactly what making amends was going to require, and why their conversation was far from over. The Federal Detention Center smelled like disinfectant and desperation, familiar scents to anyone who'd spent time in military detention facilities overseas. Caleb moved through the visitor processing with the patience of a man who understood bureaucracy but felt no need to respect it. Troy Hamilton had requested this meeting, and Caleb was curious to hear what the man had to say. Hamilton looked smaller in federal custody orange, his carefully maintained appearance replaced by the generic softness of a civilian who'd never faced real hardship. When Caleb entered the visitor room, Hamilton's attempt at a confident greeting died somewhere between his throat and his mouth. Staff Sergeant Rivers, thank you for coming. Caleb sat across the metal table without speaking, letting the silence stretch until Hamilton began to fidget. 18 years of military service had taught him that most people couldn't handle extended quiet. They'd fill it with information, admissions, desperation. I want to apologize, Hamilton finally said. For everything. For moving into your house, for involving your children, for the damage I've caused to your marriage. Apologize for stealing from military families. That too, all of it. I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to try to make it right. Caleb leaned back in his chair, studying Hamilton with the same attention he'd once given to enemy combatants during interrogations. How exactly do you plan to make it right? I've been talking to my attorney about restitution, paying back the families I've hurt. I know it'll take time, but... You don't have time, Caleb interrupted. You're looking at 8 to 12 years in federal prison. Your assets are frozen. You're financially destroyed. Hamilton's composure cracked slightly. That's why I need your help. My help? You have influence with the other victims. If you could convince them to support a plea agreement that includes restitution instead of maximum prison time, you want me to help you get a lighter sentence? I want to make this right for everyone. Your children, the families I've hurt, even Lisa, She didn't know what I was really doing. She was just trying to help military families build wealth. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes made Hamilton unconsciously lean back. Lisa used her position at the county hospital to identify military families for you to target. She received payments from your operation for 14 months. Bank records show she knew exactly what she was doing. The money was gifts. I was helping her with expenses while you were deployed. You were paying her to provide intelligence on vulnerable military families so you could steal their life savings. Hamilton opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. The lies weren't working, and they both knew it. "Here's what's going to happen," Caleb said, his voice taking on the tone that had made enemy commanders surrender without firing a shot. "You're going to federal prison for a long time. Lisa's going to federal prison for a slightly shorter time. My children are home where they belong, and they're never going to see either of you again." "You can't keep Lisa from seeing her children forever," Hamilton protested. "I can keep her from seeing them until they're adults and can make their own decisions about whether they want a relationship with someone who betrayed their father and stole from military families." Hamilton leaned forward desperately. "Look, I know you're angry. I understand. But this doesn't have to destroy everyone's life. We can work something out. Caleb's voice went deadly quiet. "There is no we, Hamilton. There's you facing the consequences of targeting military families. There's Lisa facing the consequences of betraying her husband and children. And there's me making sure those consequences are complete and permanent." "What does that mean?" Caleb stood up slowly, his movement controlled and predatory. "It means you haven't finished paying for what you've done to my family. The FBI has me. I'm going to prison. My life is destroyed. What more do you want?" "I want you to understand something very clearly," Caleb said, placing his hands flat on the metal table and leaning forward until his face was mere inches from Hamilton's. "You didn't just steal money from soldiers. You didn't just commit fraud. You moved into my house, slept in my bed, convinced my children to call you father, and tried to erase me from their lives." Hamilton was trembling now, understanding for the first time that legal consequences were just the beginning of his problems. "In 18 years of military service, I've learned how to handle men who threaten my family," Caleb continued. "I've learned how to find people who try to hide from me. I've learned how to make problems disappear permanently." "You're threatening me." "I'm explaining your situation," Caleb corrected. "Federal prison has a very specific hierarchy. Child predators are at the bottom. Men who target military families are right above them. Inmates don't like people who steal from soldiers." Hamilton's face had gone white. "You can't. You wouldn't. I have friends in the correctional system. I have contacts in federal facilities across the country. Wherever they send you, people will know what you did and who you did it to." Caleb straightened up, his expression cold and final. "You wanted to apologize and make amends. Here's how you do that. You plead guilty to all charges. You provide complete cooperation to FBI investigators. And you serve every day of your sentence without complaint or appeal. And if I do that, then maybe you survive your prison term and get released as a broken old man with nothing left but the knowledge that you destroyed your own life by targeting the wrong family. And if I don't?" Caleb's smile was colder than anything Hamilton had ever seen. "Then you learn why smart civilians don't declare war on professional soldiers." He turned and walked toward the exit, leaving Hamilton alone at the metal table with a clear understanding of his position. Legal justice was already in motion, but Troy Hamilton's real education and consequences were just beginning. Outside the detention center, Caleb called Agent Torres. "Hamilton's going to plead guilty and cooperate fully. He's also going to request protective custody, but you might want to let him think about his situation for a few days first." "What did you say to him?" I explained the terms of his surrender. That evening, Caleb sat on his couch with Connor and Emma, watching a movie and eating popcorn like they'd done before deployment, before betrayal, before everything fell apart. Emma had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Connor was dozing but fighting it, not wanting to miss time with his father. This was what Hamilton had tried to steal. Not just money or property, but this moment, this family, this life Caleb had built through 18 years of sacrifice and service. Tomorrow, he'd begin the longer work of rebuilding their family and erasing the damage Hamilton and Lisa had caused. But tonight, his children were home safe and knew beyond doubt that their father had come back for them. The war was almost over, but not quite yet. 6 months later, Caleb stood in the visiting room of the Federal Correctional Institution where Troy Hamilton was serving his 12-year sentence. She threw all of that away to help you steal from military families. She lied to our children, made them believe their father had abandoned them, and used her trust in our community to betray friends and neighbors who depended on her. Forgiveness isn't something she can buy with apologies or excuses. Hamilton looked down at his hands, calloused now from months of prison labor. I just want my family left alone. I'll give you everything you need, emails, account records, her notes. I kept copies of everything for control. They're with my attorney. You get Lisa out of our lives, and my ex-wife and kids won't ever hear from me again. Caleb nodded, not offering friendship, just an agreement. You testify. You hand over the evidence. That's it. When your sentence is done, you disappear. You never make contact with anyone connected to my family, my children, or anyone you've harmed again. You have my word. I hope you mean it, Hamilton. Because I'm not the only one who remembers what you did. There are others who will be watching. Hamilton's shoulders slumped. Understood. Caleb stood, preparing to leave. The visit was done. There were no more debts, no more chances for grace. The damage Lisa and Hamilton had caused would take years to erase. But now Caleb had everything he needed to ensure justice, and to keep his children safe. Hamilton watched him go, silent, knowing he had met the limits of both justice and mercy. Outside the prison, Caleb called his attorney and Agent Torres, updating them on the testimony and evidence soon to arrive. For the first time in years, it felt like he was almost free to rebuild, to start again, and to remind his children that family could be restored, even after war. Because forgiveness was not required for healing. Only truth, strength, and the will to protect what mattered most. Caleb's voice was firm. Not while they're children, Rebecca. They have a right to stability, peace, and to heal from what she did. If there comes a day when they want to know her side, when they're old enough to decide for themselves, I won't stand in their way. Until then, my job is to protect them, not expose them to more hurt. Rebecca sighed. I just want them to have choices. They will. One day. But not until I'm sure they're strong enough to handle the truth without being manipulated. Caleb watched his children, Connor winding up for another pitch, Emma laughing as the dog chased her across the yard, and felt a kind of peace he'd thought was lost forever. The past, with its betrayals and pain, would always cast a shadow, but it would not define their future. The letters from Lisa went unopened and unanswered. The house remained a place of healing and hope. And Caleb, battle-scarred yet unbroken, kept his promise to his children, to be the parent who stayed, protected, and loved them through every difficulty. As dusk settled over the quiet neighborhood, Caleb realized that justice had never really been about revenge or punishment. It was about safeguarding what mattered most, rebuilding the foundations of trust and love, and ensuring that the people he cared about would never again be vulnerable to betrayal. He closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds of laughter in the yard, and finally allowed himself to believe that the war was truly over. Caleb watched his children playing in the yard he'd bought, on the property he'd protected, in the life he'd rebuilt through sheer force of will and 18 years of military training. They have a right to grow up without being confused by manipulation from someone who proved she values money more than their well-being. When they're adults, they can read all the letters she wants to write. Until then, my job is to protect them. That seems harsh. It is harsh, Caleb agreed. So was telling two children their father didn't want them anymore. So was trying to steal their inheritance to fund a criminal operation. So was replacing their family name with the name of a man who preyed on military families. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. You're never going to forgive her? No, Caleb said simply. I'm not. What about forgiveness for your own peace of mind? What about moving on? I have moved on. I've rebuilt our family, restored our home, and ensured the people who tried to destroy us are paying appropriate consequences. That is moving on. But the anger is what keeps me focused on protecting my children from people who've proven they can't be trusted. The anger is what ensures I never forget what betrayal costs. The anger is useful. That night, after Connor and Emma were asleep, Caleb sat in his living room and wrote in the journal he'd been keeping since returning from deployment. The final entry was simple. Mission complete, family secured, threats neutralized. No forgiveness required or offered. Some betrayals are unforgivable, and some people forfeit their right to redemption through their own choices. Lisa and Hamilton learned that lesson too late. Connor and Emma are home. They're safe. They know their father will never abandon them and will always protect them from people who try to harm our family. That's enough. That's everything. Some wounds don't heal. Some betrayals don't deserve forgiveness. Some people don't get second chances. I'm at peace with all of that. Caleb closed the journal and locked it in his desk drawer. Tomorrow, Connor had a baseball game and Emma had a piano recital. Real life. The life he'd fought to preserve and rebuild would continue. Troy Hamilton would serve 11 more years in federal prison, learning daily what happened to men who targeted military families. Lisa would serve 6 more years, understanding too late that some mistakes were too devastating to survive. And Caleb Rivers would raise his children, knowing that some battles were worth fighting without mercy, some enemies deserved no quarter, and some betrayals earned nothing but complete and permanent consequences. He'd promised Hamilton that he would understand why targeting military families was a mistake. He'd kept that promise. He'd promised his children they would always be safe and loved. He was keeping that promise too. Some men forgave, some men forgot, some men moved on. Caleb Rivers was not some men, and his children would grow up understanding that their father was a man who kept his promises. All of them. This is where our story comes to an end. Caleb Rivers, forged by hardship and loyalty, stood guard over his family, ensuring that the mistakes and betrayals of the past would never threaten them again. For Connor and Emma, every day in their rebuilt home was proof that some fathers never truly leave, and some bonds are unbreakable.